Presentation to the committee in your written testimony talks about a lot of the actions and requirements that were in the law. We also know that there is more to be done. I want to say that I'm very appreciative of Ian Wan at the Boeing Aviation Oversight Office, who on May 13th issued a letter basically slowing down the 777X so that more information could be provided, needed to be provided for the oversight of that plane. I'm a firm believer that engineers on the ground know their job. What's not clear to me is whether people are listening to them and whether the FAA has their back. I also want to enter into the record an August 19th letter from Mr. Wan also talking about the changes to the Boeing Basu office and things that needed to be done to make sure that they continued to have the oversights and objectives. He's been clear, we need more resources. He's been clear, we need the right people to do this job. So we need the FAA, as I said, to be that gold standard. When a special committee review of aviation certification process, the SOCAC, came back with a whitewash of what we needed to do, I was disappointed that you did not take more critique with that. In fact, basically, you testified before Congress, basically the system is not broken. Well, there were parts that were broken, and they need to be fixed. So I look forward to your testimony, but reading it, I see more. Now is not a time to mince words. Now is a time to provide the leadership that it takes to get the staffing, the oversight, and the direction that is required of an oversight agency to hold manufacturers accountable. Make no mistake, the manufacturer has its own responsibilities here, and we will also hold them accountable. We believe there's more to be done on certification, more to be done on the oversight and certification process so that we are not just creating check marks on a list that now we can say the list has its check marks. That is where we were with the MCAS system. In the end, it was the tragedy that we all know too well and are still living with. So I'm very challenged by your testimony. We don't believe the FAA is prepared on January 1 of 2022 to restore direct supervision and control over those manufacturing engineers and delegated authority, because that process should have started sooner, because it is a big oversight responsibility. I will have questions for you in the Q&A about that and the type of personnel that we need in all of these jobs. We don't believe the FAA has conducted the necessary workforce review for determining the staffing and experience of those levels. And the FAA has not taken steps necessary to limit the delegation of certification tasks to industry until the FAA has verified all human factor assumptions. Restating the law's requirement in a 2-page memo is not what it takes to get that implemented. It might be a basic start, but where is proof of the implementation? And this level of reform is needed immediately. And the FAA has not fully implemented new requirements for applicants to disclose safety critical information, like information related to flight control systems, so that the FAA can be aware and fully assess the impact of those proposed design changes and innovation technologies. Again, this went into the U.S. Code and was effective immediately, but the FAA expects to issue guidance in 2022. We don't have time to wait. We need that kind of oversight today. And the FAA has yet to complete the work of the independent expert panel, which is supposed to be convened 30 days from enactment to provide timely advice on whether the FAA should formally rein in Boeing's ODA authority. I also would like to enter into the record a letter from the families who are actually calling for a pulling of that authority. I understand this, that there is a panel that is meeting now, but the process and procedures in place to review their actions and have it be transparent is critically important if we are going to get this right. So all of these safety issues are critical to all of us in America. It's critical to our families who fly on planes. It's critical to our economy. We need the leadership of the FAA to not just before our hearing today the complexity of got us to this situation is a lot of complexity of language. In reality, it has to be leadership of FAA in implementing the law. Now I'll turn to my colleague, Senator Wicker, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Senator Cantwell, for convening this oversight hearing on aviation safety and the Federal Aviation Administration's implementation of ACSA, the Aircraft Certification, Safety, and Accountability Act, which this committee shepherded through Congress and was signed into law at the end of last year. As we all know, a little more than 3 years ago, a Boeing 737 MAX crashed in Indonesia. Approximately 5 months later, a second MAX aircraft crashed in Ethiopia. And I too want to recognize the families of the victims and tell them how much we appreciate their input over time. It's really hard to put into words our emotions in this regard. However, the committee did produce bipartisan legislation to improve aviation safety based on recommendations from several experts and several expert groups that carefully examined these accidents and the development of the 737 MAX. We then worked on merging our bill with one that our colleagues in the House produced. The result was a bicameral, bipartisan bill representing the most significant aviation safety legislation in recent history. I particularly want to applaud the work of the families of the victims in pressing to reform how the federal government oversees aviation safety, particularly the process of certifying aircraft design and production. We will continue, Senator Cantwell and I and the members of this committee to press the FAA to implement the reforms in this law. Enacting legislation was an important first step. Now the FAA and the industry must follow through with implementing new programs and requirements. And so I'm pleased to welcome Administrator Dixon before us today. His agency has already taken a number of actions in response to the accidents as well as the new law, but there's still much more work ahead, as the chair has just mentioned. Administrator Dixon should update us on the progress the FAA has made so far, and he should outline how he will ensure that the FAA follows through on the remaining work. I would also ask the administrator to let us know if Congress needs to do more to ensure that the U.S. system remains the gold standard for aviation safety. Safety is a constant mission requiring the focus of the entire aviation community. We're fortunate that our nation continues to have a truly remarkable aviation safety record. But that high level of safety is the result of decades of lessons learned, as well as the dedication and hard work of safety professionals throughout the system. We cannot ever be complacent. We should always be working to improve aviation safety. So thank you, Madam Chair, and thank the Administrator for being with us today.
Thank you, Senator Wicker. And I failed to mention in my opening statement what great bipartisan work that legislation was, and certainly appreciate the hard work of your staff and my staff, and obviously our work with our House colleagues on getting that over the goal line. So many members who are with us here this morning also had legislation that was included in that, so it really was a comprehensive list of issues that that the committee really, I can say from what I know about the Senate, engaged in a very deep way, and I think that will lead to a very deep oversight of its implementation. Administrator Dixon, welcome. We welcome you to make your opening statement.
Thank you, Chair Cantwell, and good morning, Chair Cantwell, Ranking Member Wicker, and members of this committee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the FAA's approach to aviation safety oversight and our efforts to strengthen the aircraft certification process. Safety is a journey, not a destination. We're constantly evolving as a regulator and an air navigation services provider to deliver the safest and most efficient aerospace system in the world. That's our mission, and our entire workforce of nearly 45,000 federal employees is singularly focused on achieving that mission. As the head of the FAA, safety is my North Star. One of the first things I did as FAA Administrator was to make it clear that we are the regulator, and that included resetting our relationship with Boeing. I said that we would continue to exert a high level of scrutiny across the board, and we continue that scrutiny today. I've made it clear internally that we always do the right thing when it comes to safety and that I have the workforce's back. We're also asking ourselves the hard questions, and we're asking them of those that we regulate. When it comes to safety, we do not accept the status quo. This is why we embrace reform, and we are focused across the agency on continuous improvement. I'll discuss a number of initiatives that we have underway and the work that we have completed to address this goal and to implement the Aircraft Certification Safety and Accountability Act. But first, let me say to the families of the victims of the Ethiopian Airlines and Lion Air crashes that the FAA is committed to applying the lessons learned from these tragedies so that the aviation system here and around the world continues to improve. I want this committee to know that the FAA appreciates and respects the input and direction from Congress, and that we remain fully committed to executing this legislation to make near and long-term safety improvements that benefit the global aviation system. The Act has more than 100 specific requirements that we are implementing to make aircraft certification and safety oversight more holistic, systematic, transparent, and effective. I can say with confidence that we are doing more for certification oversight, and we are doing it more systematically than we were this time last year. For one, we are delegating fewer responsibilities to manufacturers and demanding more transparency from them. At the same time, we are making use of their technical expertise as we prioritize our safety oversight functions. The FAA is also revising guidance and criteria that we use for determining significant modifications to an aircraft so that proposed changes are evaluated from a whole aircraft system perspective and not just a single part. We are promoting the use of safety management systems, or SMS, internally and externally. With SMS, an organization actively searches for and identifies safety issues and then addresses the root cause. From my own experience, I know that SMS works, but only if there is buy-in from everyone at all levels of the organization, from the C-suite down to the person pushing the broom on the shop floor. At the FAA, that means when anyone at any level flags an issue, I've got their back. No questions asked. Now, because SMS works, we have not let the rulemaking process hinder manufacturers from using it now. Currently, 4 design and manufacturing organizations, including Boeing, have voluntarily adopted SMS, with 6 others in progress. As we know, human factors continues to be an important part of our work in evaluating aircraft and aircraft systems. We've expanded our evaluation of manufacturers' assumptions about human factors that equipment manufacturers make when they perform system safety assessments, including pilot response times. The FAA has initiated rulemaking to update regulations and the guidance for conducting system safety assessments on transport category aircraft. And we've increased our research on automation, including potential over-reliance on automated systems and loss of basic piloting skills. To support this increased emphasis on human factors, we've hired 14 human factors specialists in our aircraft certification and flight standards organizations. We're actively expanding our portfolio of data collection and analytics tools so that we can more effectively share safety data within the FAA and among industry stakeholders and international partners, Data is key to the early identification of potential hazards and safety problems. Per the Act, we have a new contract with the Transportation Research Board that will help us discover emerging safety trends in aviation. Now, since aviation is a global system, the FAA is also working closely with the International Civil Aviation Organization and other international stakeholders to influence and adjust the maintenance and pilot training requirements for U.S. products operating under other civil aviation authorities. Chair Cantwell, Ranking Member Wicker, and members of this committee, as you can see, the FAA is fully committed to a thorough and complete implementation of the Aircraft Certification, Safety, and Accountability Act. We approach all of this work with humility and never take safety for granted. However, we are not just doing this work because you have directed us to do it. We are doing it because it's the right thing to do for aviation safety. It is our mission. That's what the public expects, and it's the standard that we have set for ourselves, and the agency will accept nothing less. Thank you again for your support and your direction, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Administrator Dixon. On the bill itself, I want to get to some basic yes and no's if I could. The legislation, in our mind, in crafting it, was a clear stop of what we thought was a continuation towards more delegation and a return closer to the elements of what DER was. Do you agree, yes or no?
I would agree with that. Yes, we have we have limited the amount of delegation that we're doing, particularly in the case of Boeing, but we're looking at across the entire ODA system as well.
So would you answer these questions? Has the FAA completed a workforce review recommended by the Department of Transportation, IG, in 2015 as it relates to your workforce needs?
We are in the process of completing that review in the context of the certification reform legislation. As I said, we have increased our number of human factors experts, almost doubled our cadre there. We have done a review of our chief scientists and technical advisors and using them as well. But that review is ongoing, and look forward to working with the committee as it is completed, because I think that we need to continue to make sure that that's a dynamic process.
Well, we had a deadline for September 23rd, 2021, and certainly you could have written to Congress and said, we can't meet that deadline. But having a workforce that you know is the technical oversight necessary to do the reviews, we think is step number one. And when we look at the lack of technical oversight on certain issues in a changing dynamic aviation market, this is really problematic. And I think in Mr. Wan's letter, he's basically talking about the fact that 53 people in an oversight office of 1,500 people on such the scale of aviation manufacturing is not enough. Would you agree?
We have increased our number of engineers in the BASU and our engineers on the production line as well, and we will continue to evaluate all of that going forward.
This is the language I don't like. Okay, we had a deadline. We would have loved to see an assessment of the workforce, something that would have said to Congress, here's where we think we're coming up short, here's what we think we need to do. So today, just like all the other IG risk reports, everything else, the comments back from the FAA are, we're working on this. We want to get on the same page about needs. We're about to go into our appropriation process. And even though we have authorized various things in the past, we have appropriators who end up cutting these very necessary functions for the FAA to do a good oversight role. But if we just say for a deadline of September 23rd of this year, we're continuing to work on it in the future, it hasn't given us the ability to hold you accountable. And that's what we're going to do. We have to do that because we need this system to work effectively for everybody, for safety and for economics. So I want to get to because my time is going to dwindle down here, the critical safety functions. And this was something our House colleagues worked on as well and put in civil penalties for violation of disclosure of this information. And I guess what I'm saying is your process right now is following a tab process, you know, the same process of oversight and collection by individuals that led us to the MCAS system. That group didn't catch MCAS. And what we've written into law is that we want an integrated system, if you will. Some people call it graybeards. And we want those people at the beginning of the process. We want them reviewing the critical information and determining whether more oversight needs to be done. So do you think that your tab process is a fulfillment of the law?
We are adapting the tab process to comport with the legislation. So it is a good starting point, but this integrated project team that you're referring to is definitely a part of what we are doing going forward and how we are organizing ourselves, both for future certification projects and for projects that are ongoing now.
But we have certification going on right now.
Yes.
So why wouldn't you have made a big priority setting up a critical information certification team now for the ongoing certification projects? The reason I'm bringing this up is, again, we've seen two instances here where you're going to issue a report from whistleblowers before the end of the year. And what we're hearing from whistleblowers is the same that we've heard from the IG and others, and that is that line engineers had early warnings, whether it's the 787 battery issue or whether it was this issue related to synthetic airspeeds or the complexity of automation and overload of pilots in the system. But those line engineers weren't listened to. And that's why we want this critical information system and integrated set up immediately.
Yes, ma'am. And the voluntary safety reporting program that we've had in place is one mechanism, but the integrated program reviews are ongoing now, and that will be a big part of both existing projects and the new certification projects.
I will come back to this, but I want to go to my colleagues. But I just want you to know I'm not going to allow the law to be skirted here. This issue is about whether you're going to follow a process that allows us to see the work of the FAA, see that it's completed, and not just hear it's ongoing. Thank you. Senator Wicker.
Thank you, Senator Cantwell. Mr. Administrator, let me start off with safety management systems. You mentioned voluntary adoption of these. Can you give us the manufacturers who are engaged in that, making progress in voluntary SMSs?
We have currently among the transport category, airframers and engines, we have Boeing, Pratt & Whitney, and General Electric. And I would have to look, I believe Gulfstream is in there as well. And then there are a number of others in work.
A number of others?
A number of other manufacturers, 6 in the pipeline that we have not fully accepted.
Okay, well, then supply us with those names on the record. There's supposed to be a notice of proposed rulemaking with regard to the mandatory SMSs. When will that notice of proposed rulemaking be issued?
Well, Senator, we're making good progress on the SMS rulemaking. I anticipate that it will be the NPRM will be next fall, about less than a year from now, and then we'll have it out for public comment, and then we'll proceed on from there.
Why that long?
Well, there's a lot of work that has to be done to justify the rule, and we're learning from the implementation of the voluntary programs that are out there now, and so make sure that we get it set up correctly and that we are able to adjudicate all the public comments that we know will come in. We're using that time to make sure that we've got a strong and sustainable SMS for manufacturers and for other segments of the aviation community as well.
Let me ask one question that I just have to ask that doesn't deal with implementation of the statute, but it does deal with safety. and that is that's the individuals we may lose from the workforce because they simply do not intend to comply with President Biden's executive orders that require all federal employees and federal contractors to receive the COVID-19 vaccine. It seems to me that there are going to be a large number of individuals who will just lose their job, leave the workforce rather than comply with this. Could you address what impacts this vaccine mandate may have on your safety workforce?
Well, Senator Wicker, my focus is on safety and on running the safest and most efficient aerospace system in the world. And we have dealt with challenges throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, and we will make sure that we continue to operate safely and that we manage our workforce appropriately.
Well,
and I certainly want everyone to...
You're going to need numbers, Mr. Administrator, to do that. Do you expect a significant drop in the workforce from Americans who just are not going to be told what they have to inject into their own bodies?
We're focused on complying with the executive order by November 22nd within the agency. I do not expect to lose a significant portion of our workforce. We will make sure that we are able to satisfy our safety mission.
Based on what information do you estimate that you will not lose a significant portion of the workforce?
Well, again, the requirement is there. We are working with our employees as we have throughout the pandemic to make sure they are supported and they have all the information that they need to make the best possible decisions. We have a very well-established process within the agency for handling our people.
Let's be mindful of that. With regard to the international engagement, how are the bilateral agreements working, and is there anything we need to do at the congressional level to help you?
The bilateral agreements are working well, but they do require constant engagement. With respect to Europe in particular, my counterpart over at the Director General of Transport over in Europe and I held a bilateral summit on aviation safety in June to reinforce the importance and the alignment between the U.S. and the EU on aviation safety issues. As a matter of fact, I saw him again last week in Bogota, and we have continued that dialogue, and we will make sure that there is consistency and alignment across all the aspects of the bilateral agreement.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Administrator, this is exactly, your answer on SMS is exactly what I'm talking about in skirting the law. It's been long known that we need to implement a mandatory SMS system. So a voluntary system is not enough. The DOTIG found recently on October 21st, 2021, the FAA oversight over SMS was not effective. So I think my colleagues' questions here are not about whether you can do a voluntary system. Again, when there is an oversight of a true SMS system required by an Administrative Procedures Act, overseen by the FAA, you will be seen as how you hold them accountable, and we will be able to review that. Anything less is not meeting the letter of the law. Senator Tester.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Ranking Member Wicker for holding this hearing. Thank you for being here for your testimony. I'm going to start with kind of leading off where Senator Wicker was, except it deals with traffic control towers. We've had a hard time. I'm from Montana. We've had a hard time getting those fully staffed under the best of circumstances. And so the question becomes, do you anticipate losing any air traffic controllers once the mandate takes effect? And what are you doing to make sure that we have enough traffic controllers in our towers?
Well, thank you for the question, Senator Tester. And as I said a moment ago, we have dealt with people issues throughout the pandemic.
Sure.
And the safety and health of my workforce is at the top of the list in terms of being able to serve the public in air traffic control operations. I do not anticipate, there is certainly potentially progressive discipline processes if we get to that point. But at this point, I do not anticipate, I'm not hearing about any particular issues with respect to air traffic controller staffing, but it's something that we are focused on a daily basis.
So do you have what percentage of air traffic controllers are vaccinated right now?
The data is incomplete. The requirement for the controllers to attest, it's a very manual process, and the reporting is uneven around the system. So I don't have an accurate metric to share at this point.
So that's a problem. And it's a problem if I don't know. It's a bigger problem if you don't know it, and that you don't know what the exposure is here if you don't know how many people are not vaccinated. Does that make sense to you?
That's correct, yes.
So what, are you doing anything special that's been effective in encouraging folks to get vaccinated?
We are working very closely with our labor partners to encourage. We're encouraging broadly. The Secretary and I are sending regular updates and encouraging the workforce to do the right thing and get their vaccines. And we will continue to do that on down to the individual basis as we go forward.
It's a concern, I think, could be a real train wreck if you're not on top of it. I want to talk about an annual safety culture survey that is required, hasn't been done yet. And there was one put out in August of 2020, at least a safety culture assessment report. That August of 2020 report had some pretty alarming statistics in it. 49% FAA employees indicated they believe that safety concerns or instances will not be addressed. 43%, this was in August of last year. 43% believe the FAA delegates too many certification activities to the industry. 34%, the employees said the fear of retribution is one of the reasons employees don't report safety issues. So we're a year later now, and we don't have that annual safety culture survey. When can we expect it?
Senator, the safety culture survey was done as a baseline as we set up the voluntary safety reporting program. And that started in April, and we wanted to let that run for a period of time. So we will be doing the survey within the next few months, and then renew it on an annual basis going forward. But this really gave us a good baseline for where we're starting from.
Yeah, so I think it's required by law that in fact, if you want to go attorney on you here, Section 132 of the ACSAA requires it.
And we will be conducting it on an annual basis. That's correct.
But shouldn't it have been done by now?
Well, there's going to be more beneficial to do it with the voluntary safety reporting program that we put in place, which is extremely important in terms of driving this kind of transparency and openness that I want, and it'll give us a better baseline on how we're doing with
this.
That
not unlike the previous question, this leads me to, I mean, if you're not surveying as mandated, then how can the FAA inform us and the public that the culture is improving?
We are surveying, Senator. We are going to conduct that survey, and we will be doing it on an annual basis.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Administrator, it's been a little over 10 months since the Aviation Certification Standards and Accountability Act was signed into law, and I was proud to support that legislation that also included key reforms to the aircraft certification process. When does the FAA hope to achieve full implementation of those reforms?
Well, we are working on those very aggressively now. We have achieved currently 15 out of 19 of the time-limited items, but there are others that this work will go on for some period of time with the SMS rulemaking and the surveys that we just talked about. So there will be a continuous improvement process as we go forward.
So you really don't see an end date because you plan on those other 4 areas to have a continuous process?
Well, the other 4 areas, so one of the 4 areas was the expert panel for review of transport category ODA. And that required some work with our labor partners that took a couple of months. And then we had to we had to put a solicitation out for industry participants to comport with the requirements in the law. And that kind of work is ongoing. It takes a while to do that right, but we are fully committed to doing it, and we'll see the results of that work here very soon.
Okay, thank you. The Act also directs the FAA to develop a better understanding of the human factors when certifying aircraft, and the bill specifically requires the FAA to account for pilots of all skill levels, both international and domestic pilots. What countries are you working with to better understand the pilot skills that we see across the globe?
Well, we're working through multiple countries. We start with the states of design for transport category aircraft, particularly Europe, Brazil, and Canada and the U.S. But we go beyond that. We work through ICAO. We spearheaded the International Civil Aviation Organization, and we spearheaded the setup of a pilot training and licensing panel. We also work bilaterally and regionally with our aviation safety counterparts around the world. As I said a few minutes ago, I was in Bogota, Colombia, working with the Latin American regulators. I had bilaterals with several Latin American regulators last week, and talking about the work that we're doing on things like manual flying skills, flight path management, training, and also we will, in the certification process, we will require going forward, as we did with the 737 MAX, the use of international pilots of various experience levels and training backgrounds to help with the validation of the operational testing on the aircraft as well.
Has cooperation been good when you're working with these other countries? And I guess what have you learned from them?
Well, there are, I think the important thing is that we are leading the efforts on flight path management and use of automation, proper use of automation, manual flying skills. I think around the world, some of these issues have not gotten the attention that they need.
What issues?
The issues around manual flying skills and also information management in the cockpit. You know, when you think about it, use of iPads, you know, on the flight deck, or electronic charting, the way that individuals process information on the flight deck, all of that has changed in recent years. And so it's very important that pilots are able to maintain situational awareness on their energy state and on the flight path of the aircraft. And that's what we're working on to make sure that we promulgate those issues with regulators around the world.
Okay. During your last appearance before the committee, I asked you if you had concerns about the pilot reliance on automation, and you said automation is a benefit, but the individual still has to be engaged with the machine. So when you're working with the international partners to establish those training standards, are you comfortable with where we're headed, and especially with regards to the automated system? Are the pilots feeling comfortable about that?
The flight path management is at the core of the concern that I have, and as a matter of fact, we have in draft, and it will be out for public review shortly, a new advisory circular that our chief scientist for human factors has been working with the aviation community on for several years. And it will address guidance material and potential application to air carrier training programs for flight path management, which is knowing what your clearance is, putting the airplane there, and then monitoring it to make sure that it stays there. Also manual flying skills and information management that I was talking about before. So all of these are extremely important in maintaining the situational awareness around the aircraft. And we will use this at ICAO, but we will also help regulators around the world implement these principles into their oversight and crew training programs as well. And that will be an effort that we will undertake here in the coming years.
Thank you.
Senator,
Thank you,
yes.
Madam Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Administrator Dixon, when the Department of Transportation Office of Inspector General investigated the 737 MAX, it found that the FAA had increasingly delegated to Boeing the assessment of flight controls and stabilizer plans. Part of what we did in response was to seek to end that delegation and improve the certification processes. I'm of a mind that we need to do more. 737 was certified in the 1960s, but Boeing was able to gain approval for its MAX aircraft under an amendment to an over 50-year-old type certificate. And in response to the new law, the FAA waited until September 16, 2021 to issue a one-page policy memo limiting delegation, which was one of the root causes of the issues found by the Inspector General. Section 106 of the law was immediately effective on December 27th, 2020, so there was a clear lag between that December passage of the law and the implementation of this one-page delegation. What accounted for the delay?
Senator, we have used various mechanisms to implement the provisions of the law as quickly and most expeditiously as we possibly can while we go through the formal process of developing orders. And the direction to restrict delegation without validation of the assumptions for critical system design features actually was in place very early in 2021. So I'll have to check on the timing that you're referring to.
Well, the timing of that many months, I think, is symptomatic of broader problems in terms of prompt response to new laws in issue rules and undertaking rulemaking, and a number of my colleagues already highlighted that problem in other areas, which brings me to the October 20th, 2021 Inspector General report finding that the FAA's oversight of American Airlines was not as rigorous or robust as it should have been. The report states that the FAA, quote, lacks effective oversight controls, end quote, to make sure that American is addressing the root causes of problems that they fix. What is the FAA going to do in response?
Well, Senator, thank you for the question. Our oversight, our internal processes also identified these issues, and we do need, and we are putting in place mechanisms, for example, for professional development of our inspectors so that they can do more effective root cause analysis, which is part of that oversight for a safety management system. So we concurred with most of those recommendations, and we already have plans underway to address them and close those gaps.
What's the timeline for fulfilling those plans?
I would have to get back to you specifically, but much of that work is already underway.
Let me ask you about a similar issue. The original 737, as I mentioned, was certified in the 1960s. I continue to have concerns about the process of modifying the aircraft without a full and robust certification that takes into account the impact of the modifications on the functioning of the entire system. Do you share those concerns?
We, as required by the legislation and also the various reviews and investigations, we are examining changes to the criteria for what would require a new type certificate. We want to balance that with beneficial safety improvements during a product service life. We want safety improvements to come to the fore, but we need some criteria on that. And so we've commissioned MITRE to look at the criteria for making those decisions. And we are also working with our international partners. We began meeting with them in July. We chartered the International Authority Change Product Rule Working Group that is meeting on a regular basis to make sure that these rules are harmonized around the world regardless of manufacturer.
Thank you. I look forward to hearing more about what you're doing on all these issues. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Administrator Dixon, thank you so much for coming back before us today. The FAA issued a safety alert on 5G interference to aircraft, and I want to talk with you about that. Because according to Bloomberg government, the agency stated that, and I'm quoting, action might be required to address potential interference with sensitive aircraft electronics, end quote. And it is my understanding that there are 39 countries that are currently using the C-band spectrum for 5G services without any interference to aviation. So are you taking this evidence into consideration?
Thank you, Senator. And I appreciate the question. First of all, my focus is on aviation safety, and I need to make sure that the safety of the public is protected. But I will tell you in no uncertain terms that 5G in this spectrum and aviation, particularly radio altimeters, are the primary concern. They can coexist. And we are working very closely with the FCC. We have had recent engagement with the telecom companies, and we will figure this out so that 5G and aviation safety can coexist.
Okay, well, in Europe, you've got 24 countries that have been using 5G for 3 years, including in the same spectrum band planned to be used here in the U.S. They have had 0 adverse occurrences and 0 claims of interference. So how are you working with them to ensure that there are no issues and that you are learning from their experience and maybe even adopting some of their best practices?
Well, again, it's a great question. The use of that spectrum in terms of power levels and specific deployment locations is different in different parts of the world, so it's a bit of an apples to oranges comparison. But the standard-setting bodies, RTCA in the U.S. and EuroK in Europe, are both looking very closely at these issues. And I do anticipate there will be some modifications eventually over time that will need to occur to some of these avionics. But in the short term, again, we are working very closely with the telecom industry and the FCC to make sure that, again, the 5G deployment can occur, but that it can be done without an adverse impact to aviation safety.
Well, and I would think that there are plenty of lessons that you can learn from Europe since they are using the same band. Is that correct?
That's correct. Europe, Japan, others, and again, all of these deployments are somewhat different than what's planned in the U.S., but we're certainly learning from each one.
Very good. Okay, in your testimony, you note that, and I'm quoting now, it is imperative for the FAA to take steps to accelerate and expand the deployment of new technologies in order to reduce barriers and actively promote innovation. So I want you to elaborate on this. What specific steps are you taking to reduce barriers and promote innovation within the FAA?
Well, I think a good example is our AUS office. It works across our, which does our drone integration. As you know, we have the rulemaking around remote identification. We have engaged the industry on the next step in that rulemaking, which is beyond visual line of sight. But what we need to do is work across the various lines of business. In other words, air traffic, aviation safety, airports, maybe even commercial space. And that is an enterprise approach that across disciplines that has not been as necessary with traditional manned aviation. And so we are really taking a data-driven enterprise approach, and our AUS office will help us do that in terms of breaking down those barriers between disciplines at the FAA.
Excellent. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you for holding this important hearing. Thank you for being here. I also wanted to express my sympathies and appreciation to Nadia and Michael and Stumo, who are here with us today. They lost their daughter, as we know, Samia Rose, in the crash in Ethiopia. We also lost a Minnesotan in that crash, and I want to acknowledge him as well. Mukhad Hussein from St. Cloud, Minnesota. I am glad that we passed this bill. It was really, really important to pass this bill, and I want to thank the chairwoman for her leadership. But now we have to make sure it gets implemented. That is always the trick. We can pass whatever bills we want, but we want to make sure that it gets done. Mr. Dickson, in your testimony, you highlighted a voluntary safety management system for manufacturers. And I know that you noted that several manufacturers, I think you said 4, are voluntarily adopting SMS. Does the FAA have plans to make SMS mandatory for manufacturers?
Yes, Senator. We have rulemaking underway, and we expect the NPRM to be out for public comment next year.
Okay. And when do you think that'll get done?
It will depend on the administrative process associated with rulemaking, but we are learning a lot from the programs that we have out there now. SMS has been very successful in the air carrier community, and applying it to manufacturers is a somewhat different paradigm. And so we're using that data and interaction and the oversight that SMS enables to make sure that we get the best possible initial proposed rule out there.
Okay. I'll ask another question on the record about, I know that Senator Cantwell asked about workforce and how important it is to have the qualified people to do that. I'll ask you that on the record. What steps has the FAA taken to establish international safety standards for foreign pilots? And how will you ensure that pilots and airlines are complying with those standards?
It's a great question. We have spearheaded the implementation of a pilot training and licensing panel at the International Civil Aviation Organization. We did that about 2 years ago. The FAA's Chief Scientist for Human Factors is providing leadership, as well as one of our top training subject matter experts, and that group continues to work to this day. We also take what we have done in the U.S. with upset prevention and recovery training, which is required for U.S. carriers now, and then we are promulgating that around the world. And as I said, I had several bilaterals with my Latin American counterparts last week. We will work with them to help them implement the kinds of beneficial training improvements that we undertake in the U.S.
Do you have a timetable for that?
It'll be ongoing work. I think the next significant step is at the ICAO Assembly, which is coming up next August.
Okay.
And but there will be work that will be ongoing between now and then.
In your testimony, you noted plans to update FAA policies in order to prevent fraud in the self-certification process. How can we trust that the updated self-certification process will not lead to cost-saving shortcuts that endanger passengers?
Senator, I've made it very clear from day one that safety cannot be compromised. It has to be our top priority. And we have to make sure, both within the agency and those that we oversee, that business pressures, production pressures, operational pressures do not overcome safety. And so that's what we are all about, making sure that we use the information that we get from our workforce and that they do the same thing to drive beneficial transparency and safety improvements.
Do you agree, this is a bill, I believe, the Safe Skies Act, but do you believe that cargo pilots should operate under the same fatigue rules as commercial airline pilots? This is the bill I have with Senator Cantwell, Blumenthal, Markey, and Gillibrand. Well,
there's no question that appropriately managing fatigue among pilots is critical to safety, and we have a requirement for fatigue risk management plans that have to be submitted every 24 months. We're not seeing anything in the data with the safety systems there. As you know, that happened a number of years ago, so it's something that we would certainly be interested in working with you on.
Continue to be concerned on that. And then finally, on cyber security, as we see across industries, there's more and more concern about what's going on, whether it's the electricity grid, whether it is aviation. Do you believe the FAA currently has sufficient resources and workforce to protect data, defend the national airspace system from the growing number of cybersecurity threats?
I receive regular updates, and I've been out to our command center several times on our cyber capabilities, and we're well positioned currently, but it is something that we need to be constantly vigilant about to make sure that we reduce our attack surface and we can continue to serve the public. So I think we are well positioned now, but it is an area of focus for us to make sure that we continue to bring on the workforce that we need in that area.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Administrator Dixon, good to see you. And I want to thank you and commend you for the work you and the FAA did on commissioning the FAA Alaska Aviation Safety Initiative. And as you know, sir, this came out of the February 2020 NTSB report and the February, which looked at a 10-year period and noted the very high accident rates in Alaska, the high fatality rates in Alaska relative to any other communities, any other parts of the country. So I want to ask, although it's not a budget document, the Aviation Safety Initiative report as it relates to Alaska certainly points out features in which we need improvement. And I always like to say, yes, it is expensive to help smaller communities like mine, but I have over 200 communities that aren't even connected by roads. If the federal government helped us build roads as opposed to shutting down our ability to build roads, we wouldn't need this kind of infrastructure. But as you know, we need it dramatically, and it is all about safety. So how will you use that Alaska Aviation Safety Initiative report to prioritize funding initiatives to be put in the budget with the FAA?
Well, thank you, Senator. And I, as you and I have discussed, I understand the importance of aviation to Alaska and Alaska to our economy and our aviation system. The answer to your question is the FASI will help inform us on our resource decisions and what our resource needs are. We have identified funding, just as one example, for the equipment takeover that the state has requested, and look forward to working with you and the state to address long-term capital needs even beyond what's in the report itself.
Good. I appreciate that. Again, I want to thank you for your focus on this. It's very much needed for my constituents, but anyone who comes up to Alaska, right? I mean, unfortunately, we have too many crashes. And so, Madam Chair, I'm looking forward to working with this committee and the state of Alaska and the FAA on these important budgetary prioritizations. Let me mention another one. You know, Alaska laid the groundwork for the nationwide deployment of ADS-B, known as NextGen, and yet the majority of Alaska is without coverage in airspace that is not classed to require coverage, even in congested areas where there's been some concerns in terms of airspace, like in the Bethel region. Do you think it's time for the FAA or Congress to revisit options in that area with regard to NextGen to provide aircraft owners with the avionics equipment that is needed, particularly in places that I'm mentioning that don't have the coverage?
Well, Senator, I want to tell you, you know, safety is certainly a shared priority. And again, I realize the unique aspects of aviation in Alaska with the number of aircraft and how communities rely on aviation to survive. And I know that stakeholders, I'm aware that they've asked for a second capstone project, as you talked about. And I think the first one was a great success. And we can use it as a template. It was. And would look forward to working with you and the stakeholders up there to see what that might look like.
But let me ask one final question. And I've been trying to determine an exact comparison of how safety-related infrastructure funding makes it to the Alaska region as compared to the rest of the U.S. And my staff has reached out on an accounting of receipt expenditures, budget, proposed expenditures for air traffic organizations, facilities and equipment, and was surprised to hear that the FAA doesn't track ATO F&E spending by state or even by service center. And, you know, our FAA in Alaska, as you know, they do heroic work, not just for Alaska, but for the country as planes are flying over to Asia. We have 586,000 square miles of land in close to 2.5 million square miles of airspace. But there's been no accounting. It's been difficult to get accounting for the funding of just the Western service area. Do you have or can you provide for future a breakdown of where those costs in dollars are being spent? I think it's important for us in the Congress to be able to see comparisons with regard to different regions, at least regions, if not states.
Well, I'm aware of the request, and we are working on it. Look forward to working with you. Obviously, it's a federal system, and expenditures are not tracked normally by jurisdiction, but I think that there's a way to get you the information.
Do you think it's useful information? I think it would be useful.
I think if anyone on the committee, yourself included, think that it's useful information, we will endeavor to provide it in a form that's useful to you.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you. Senator Baldwin is next, and then followed by Senator Duckworth, who is on remotely unless one of our colleagues from the other side of the aisle appears. I'm going to run and vote, and I thank Senator Baldwin for taking over the chair while I'm gone.
Yes, and I want to thank you, Chair Cantwell, for holding this hearing today. And thank you, Mr. Dixon, for your appearance here. This committee passed necessary legislation last year in response to the Boeing 737 MAX crashes, and it's critically important that we follow through with oversight as the FAA continues to implement the new law. Mr. Dixon, about a month ago, the Federal Aviation Administration announced that airports are no longer required to use firefighting foam that contains PFAS. However, that announcement is limited in its effectiveness as the FAA has not authorized the use of alternative foams. Airports and their neighboring communities in my state see this as an empty gesture. I believe it misses the intent of Congress's direction in FAA reauthorization. Residents in these communities deserve more immediate action to protect their drinking water. So what are the FAA's next steps to ensure that airports are able to transition to PFAS-free firefighting foam? And on what timeline can we expect that to happen?
Well, thanks for the question, Senator Baldwin. And this is a very important issue that we've been working very diligently, and we fully respect the intent of Congress in the legislation, and we are working to do this as rapidly as we possibly can. We've got to balance the effectiveness of the firefighting foam, which is really important for public safety in the event of a fuel fire, along with the removal of the PFAS or the fluorine-free foams. To that end, we built a test facility, and we were interrupted somewhat by COVID because of inability to be able to get on site for some period of time, but we have already conducted over 400 tests of 15 types of foam. We have not found one yet that has adequate performance. I've actually witnessed some of these tests myself, and it would be very concerning to use any one of these because it's just not as effective at putting the fire out. So in the meantime, we have taken steps that basically free airports from the use of PFAS foam for any testing certification. We've got recapture equipment out there where it doesn't need to be discharged anymore, and we will continue to do that. Really, the only occasion where PFAS foam would need to be used is for an actual aircraft fuel fire. For hot breaks, anything else, they don't need to discharge anything. We are also working very closely with DoD because this is based on a military specification, and I'm optimistic that we will have new standards set by January 2023, and we're working very closely with DoD on the research. We do the effectiveness part of the research, and they do the chemical composition.
Mr. Dickson, in previous hearings, we've discussed my bipartisan American Aviator Act. That legislation seeks to expand flight training programs for veterans who are seeking jobs as commercial airline pilots. Senator Hoeven and I secured $10 million in the fiscal year 2020 and 2021 appropriations bills for our veteran pilot training program. I'm concerned that the FAA has yet to make these funds available. While I was pleased to see FAA recently move forward with other aviation workforce development grants, it's beyond time that we put this available funding for veterans pilot training grant program to use. So could you provide me with an update of when we can expect to see the notice of available funding for veterans pilot training grant programs?
Thank you for the question, Senator Baldwin. This is something that's really important, and this is a novel grant program for us, and it took some time to set up the specific parameters. We are making good progress. With respect to the Veterans Pilot Training Grants, we are driving to issue the first grant solicitation within this calendar year. So I anticipate that you'll see the first NOFO within the next few weeks.
Very good. Senator Moran, I will now recognize you for questions.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Appreciate the recognition. Administrator Dixon, welcome to the committee. Welcome back to the committee. We've had a long history in regard to the 737 MAX and its relationship to Kansas in particular. This goes back to the decertification of the MAX in 2020. As of now, the 737 MAX is in commercial operation in 31 airlines flying in 179 countries, and it's completed more than 206,000 commercial flights since that December. However, China and Russia remain the only civil aviation authority yet to approve the Boeing 737 MAX's return to service. Given the global regulatory community has broadly approved the MAX for operation, what's the outstanding issues for China and Russia, and what role is the FAA playing in resolving those?
We are meeting with the Chinese and Russian civil aviation authorities on a regular basis and have provided them all the technical information that they need. So I'm confident that on a technical level, we are in good shape, and they will make the decisions that they need to make within their systems.
What you suggest is that the technical information is there. There may be other factors utilized by China and Russia in making a determination.
Yes, sir.
Administrator Dixon, a handful of universities, including one in Kansas, Wichita State University, were selected to carry out 124 of the 127 ACSAA-related safety system human factor analysis. Specifically, Wichita State is conducting a review and analysis of human error, methodologies, framework, taxonomies that could be used by industry during the design and evaluation. Do you have a comment on the value of that kind of work?
That's extremely valuable, and again, it helps add perspective and valuable research to our efforts on human factors and some of the issues that we talked about this morning.
What's the FAA oversight in that regard, and what's the time frame for the results of those university research work?
I'm not sure of the precise time frame, but again, this is ongoing work and very important to our existing human factors work.
Okay. Finally, I am hearing concerns, Administrator, about significant delays in the FAA's ability to issue regulations, guidance, and policy. I know there are lots of new demands on the agency, and there's new innovation and automation, and even the demands that are included in the Aircraft Certification, Safety, and Accountability Act. But it's really important for the FAA to be able to do its work in a timely, although appropriate and adequate manner with near perfection. What's the FAA, what are you doing, what can you do to reduce the backlog in that work?
Well, certainly, there are multiple factors here. If you're talking about rulemaking, obviously there's the requirements for public comment and the Administrative Procedures Act process, which requires us to have safety data and a positive cost-benefit business case there as well. There has been some COVID impact that's led to some backlog. We're in the process of, we've expanded work hours, and we're looking at some additional resources within our Chief Counsel's office to be able to bring these things forward more expeditiously and make sure that any choke points that might be in the process are addressed.
One of the things that you didn't mention is staffing. Any comments in that regard?
So something that we're always focused on to make sure that we're adequately resourced. And again, I don't know that that's the central issue, but it is something that we need to look at, both with our inspectors and the rest of our workforce as well.
My understanding is that the vaccine requirements have been visited about in this hearing this morning. I'm sorry I wasn't able to hear any of your answers, but I would ask, do you perceive a challenge in the near future with employees being discharged or no longer able to work because of non-compliance with that mandate?
Again, I'm not hearing anything at this point, but it's something that we're focused on a daily basis to make sure that we can complete our mission, both the operational and the safety aspects of our mission.
Administrator, I look forward to further conversations with you. Thank you. Chairwoman Baldwin, thank you.
Thank you. Next, joining us remotely is Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Chairwoman Baldwin, and also thank you for Chairwoman Cantwell for holding today's hearing. I want to thank the committee and Ranking Member Wicker for their leadership on last year's aircraft certification bill that included multiple provisions that I worked on. Mr. Dixon, as you know, the Department of Transportation's Inspector General recently published a report that revealed potentially unsafe airline maintenance practices and raised some real serious questions over FAA's oversight of major U.S. carriers. For example, 92% of cases sampled by the IG found that FAA inspectors accepted the airline's analysis rather than identifying the root causes themselves. To me, this is really another example of FAA's often too cozy relationship with industry partners, which fosters an institutional mindset and I think a culture of complacency that, if we leave it unchecked, can lead to deadly consequences for flight crews and passengers alike. Mr. Dickson, what specific mitigation strategies has FAA implemented to address institutional oversight concerns and improve the technical capabilities and regulatory knowledge of the FAA workforce?
Well, thank you for the question, Senator Duckworth. And the issues that you're bringing up are not acceptable, and we need to do better in terms of the career development and the ability of our inspectors to identify and address root cause analysis in particular. We agreed with the bulk of the IG findings. We're implementing improvements to those processes to address the issues. Those are already in work and underway. We had actually identified similar findings through our regular internal review processes, and we're in the process of putting those improvements in place. So some of this was not were not issues that we were aware of. We already had improvement plans in place. Also, we know that our oversight responsibilities, in this hearing, we're talking a lot about manufacturers, but this goes into the continued operational safety of a product, how crews are being trained, how airplanes are being maintained, because it is a continuous loop. So we've embraced that input. We are putting those improvements in place. And again, when I talk about resetting the relationship, it's not just with Boeing, it's with all of the companies that we oversee.
Does the resetting of that relationship include an update to your policy so that you prohibit closing a compliance action before the carriers implement the necessary corrective action? Because I feel like if you close the compliance action and they haven't done the corrective action, then there's no real incentive for them to complete that corrective action. Has this been part of the updates to your policies?
It's a good point. We actually just stood up this summer a compliance program executive council and steering committee, and they are taking that into consideration, and it's something that we'll look very closely at going forward as to how the entire spectrum of compliance works all the way up to enforcement.
Okay, well, I would like to review that with you at a later time, because I do think you need to update your policy.
We'll be happy.
Thank you. On Part 147 implementation, the new law that our committee is examining today includes the bipartisan Part 147 Act, which I was very proud to help develop and pass in partnership with a fellow aviator, someone who has far more hours than I do, Senator Inhofe. For years, we've heard from students and schools and employers that the FAA's regulations are decades out of date and undermine significant investments students make in pursuit of careers in aviation. Our bipartisan bill requires that FAA make sure schools have the flexibility to teach core curriculum that reflects modern technical advances and innovations across the aviation industry. Administrator Dixon, nearly a year has passed since the Part 147 Act was enacted. What is the status of the FAA's efforts to update aircraft maintenance technician curricula as Congress directed, and with the interim final rule to be issued this year?
Well, Senator, I share your frustration and how long this process takes, and I appreciate your interest and your focus on this. We continue to actively work through this rulemaking, and I know that we missed the deadline in the bill, but I want to emphasize to you and really everyone on the committee that we are fully committed to it. I think that we are going to be in a position to issue the interim final rule in the coming year, but I would love to stay in contact with you and your office as we proceed. Part of what happened here is we had some issues to resolve, some professional debate within the agency on the best methodology to approach this process, and that was something that took some time to work out, but we are fully aligned now. All those issues have been resolved, and we are proceeding to meet the intent of the law as soon as we can.
Well, I hope that occurs in the first quarter of the next year and no later than the summer of next year, but we'll stay in touch with you as you move forward with it. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Senator Cruz?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Administrator Dixon, welcome. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for your words for the families of the victims of the Lion Air and Ethiopia Airlines accidents. It is critical, even as we have these discussions about things like certification and delegated authority and what reforms are needed in statute and regulation, that we not lose sight of the victims. The 346 souls lost in the Lion Air and Ethiopian Air crashes. And I thank those that are here drawing attention to those victims. As you know, last year we passed the Aircraft Certification, Safety, and Accountability Act. That law included a number of my amendments, and I think it represented meaningful reforms which will help keep the flying public safe. But I also recognize that more work may need to be done in the next FAA authorization, next Congress. And I look forward to working with my colleagues and with you and the FAA in those efforts. Administrator Dixon, in your testimony, you discuss how the FAA is transforming its relationship with manufacturers, and I'm glad to hear that. Agency capture, regulatory capture is something I have been and remain deeply concerned about, and something on which I think there is strong bipartisan concern. In your judgment, how has the industry, and specifically how has Boeing, reacted to this culture change and to the implementation of the new requirements that were part of the aviation safety bill?
Well, Senator Cruz, again, culture change requires daily focus. It requires regular focus. You can't just change a process or boxes on the org chart and expect for the kind of beneficial changes that this law provides for and that we are undertaking in terms of our own work to stick. So it is really important, within the agency that we are transparent. The Boeing is not the same as it was 2 years ago, but they have more work to do. And the voluntary SMS program that they have in place is giving us quicker information about issues that they face. But we've put more engineers on the shop floor in their factories. We have put more inspectors. We have put more rigorous oversight on them, and we will continue to do that. We have also restricted what is delegated in terms of anything that implicates human factors has to be validated by the agency before the manufacturer can proceed. And any critical safety system, we have retained delegation on that. And we're also, with the 737 MAX, we have retained the issuance of the airworthiness certificates on each individual airplane as it's produced. And so it will take some time, but we are on the path that we need to be, but it requires continuous vigilance and attention.
So staying on the topic of safety in our airspace, I was glad to see the FAA yesterday finally issued a notice of proposed rulemaking to require commercial balloon pilots to hold a valid second-class medical certificate. 2016 hot air balloon crash in Lockhart, Texas, which took the lives of 15 passengers and the pilot, and which remains the deadliest hot air balloon crash in the history of the United States, was a horrific tragedy, made worse by the fact that it was completely avoidable. Although I'm not pleased that it took the FAA almost 3 years to follow the law and to implement the legislation that I authored, the Commercial Balloon Pilot Safety Act, which had a statutory deadline of 180 days. I'm glad that the medical certificate loophole that allowed the pilot to fly that day in 2016, while he was high on a cocktail of prescription drugs that included Ritalin, Valium, and oxycodone, and was as impaired as a drunk driver, according to the NTSB, will finally be closed. Administrator Dixon, how quickly can this regulation be finalized and this loophole for commercial hot air balloon pilots be dealt with once and for all?
Well, Senator, we will have to see it through the rulemaking process, as you're aware. It is frustrating how long it takes, but we have the draft, the NPRM out there, and as soon as we get the public comments back, we will adjudicate them as quickly as we can, push it up through the department and through OIRA, and get the final rule out there.
So let me ask another topic, which is, what is the impact of federal vaccine mandates been on airline pilots and air traffic controllers?
At this point, no impact. I mean, it's something that we are focused on, certainly complying with the
Your
deadlines.
sworn testimony is vaccine mandates have had zero impact on pilots and air traffic controllers today?
I have not seen anything in our system that would indicate.
So we have seen in recent weeks thousands upon thousands of plane flights canceled. I was told by a senior leader in the aviation industry that one of the causes of it was a very significant number of air traffic controllers in Jacksonville engaged in a sick-out and refusing to go to work because of the vaccine mandate. Is your testimony that is not correct and that didn't happen?
We don't have any evidence of that, Senator. That particular event that you're referring to was one segment. I've looked at the numbers. One sector within Jacksonville Center that happened to be co-located with where there was convective weather and extensive military activity. So it did create a choke point, but it was not any kind of organized activity or sick out. It was availability on one particular shift.
And your testimony is you believe vaccine mandates have zero impacts on pilot availability. I'll tell you, I've met with the pilot unions, and that's not what the pilot unions are telling me. And your testimony is that the vaccine mandates have zero impact on air traffic controllers. That's also not what I'm hearing from the Air Traffic Controllers Union. So are they not telling the truth, or what are the facts here?
Well, Senator, I'm saying at this point in time, I am not seeing any impact from that. We work very closely with our union partners. I met with them within the last week or so, and we're not seeing any indication that there's been any impact on our staffing up to this point.
Well, passengers across the country are having their flights canceled by the hundreds and by the thousands. Might have a different perspective on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cruz, and I want to thank you for your leadership and help in forming the legislation that we passed last year. As the subcommittee chairman at the time, very much appreciate your input on that. And we are going to have another aviation hearing, forget the date, but in the near future, that is going to review, obviously, our actions on the various COVID-related bills. And I think it'll be an appropriate time to ask about the issues you brought up today. So thank you. We have Senator Warnock and then followed by Senator Thune.
Thank you so very much, Madam Chair. This week, I introduced the ARROW Act to expedite the development and adoption of sustainable aviation fuel and other emissions-reducing aviation technologies. I could not be more proud that Georgia companies like LanzaJet, Delta Airlines, and Gulfstream down in my hometown of Savannah, Georgia, have helped these aviation emissions reduction efforts take off. As we see a rise in exciting new technologies that increase fuel efficiency and reduce harmful carbon emissions, it's important that our safety oversight body has the resources and the technical expertise to allow for the quick and safe deployment of these new innovations. Mr. Dickson, do you agree that having the right in-house expertise will be crucial for FAA to successfully collaborate and partner with industry on new sustainable products and ensure that these technologies are deployed safely without unnecessary delays?
Well, thank you, Senator Warnock. It's good to see you. And the answer to your question is yes. We recognize how critical sustainable aviation fuel is, and very much want to be a partner with Congress as people consider ways to expedite its use and deployment at scale. Within our Office of Energy and Environment, there is a team of people who are dedicated to working on how best to make SAF a more routine source of aviation fuel, so we definitely want to partner with you. To your specific question, which I think is related to Section 104,
That's correct.
We have initiated the review consistent with the bill and are working very closely with our labor partners to execute on that review. And it's more in depth than we originally thought, but we're determined to make it a comprehensive review. At the same time, we have completed some concrete items, including already a comprehensive review of our Senior Technical Experts Program, which we call our STEP program. And that included benchmarking it against comparable programs throughout industry, including NASA and the European Union Aviation Safety Agency. And we've engaged in some active recruiting on our chief scientist and technical advisor positions. And I can tell you from personal experience, we've got a very capable chief scientist within our environmental group that look forward to leading those efforts.
So as you move forward in this review, can you say more about how you plan to address any identified shortfalls in the short term and in the long term as we prioritize trying to expedite these innovations in a way that's safe for the public?
Well, we have to critically evaluate the review and ensure that we take the necessary steps, as you said. And any existing shortfalls that we have, as well as those gaps that can hinder our ability to understand and oversee new or innovative technologies in terms of SAF, will be really important, because we need to engage not only the aviation community, but the producers as well.
Well, I appreciate that, and know that I'm going to continue to push the Aero Act. I think it's important that we do everything we can to move forward on sustainable aviation technologies. This is an important part of creating a sustainable and safe future, and having adequate levels of experienced personnel and technical support at the FAA is critical to the success of these efforts, so that we can have skies that are safe in every sense of the word. Thank you so much, and I look forward to working with you on this issue.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Thune.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Administrator Dixon, thank you. Welcome. And let me just start with an issue that's important in my home state of South Dakota, and that deals with Ellsworth Air Force Base, which is prepared to host the future B-21 bomber, which will train in the Powder River Training Complex. Ellsworth currently flies the B-1 bomber and hosts large force exercises in the PRTC airspace, which requires occasional altitude waivers, and I appreciate the FAA's efforts to expedite coordination with the PBFA in this space. Looking ahead more broadly, we have to ensure that our advanced military aircraft have the expanded airspace volumes and the time that they need to train. Technology modernization will be critically important to improving management of the national airspace system, particularly as new entrants such as UAS technology increasingly interact with general and commercial aviation traffic. The implementation of NextGen, which has been hampered by the pandemic, will be crucial in the coming years. These investments will allow the United States to better utilize existing infrastructure, increasing the capacity and efficiency of the NAS. Could you speak to the status of NextGen implementation, particularly how the agency plans to make up for pandemic-related delays? And then secondly, how is the FAA incorporating concepts like adaptive or dynamic airspace in its NextGen initiative to meet the growing demands on the national airspace system while maintaining safety for current users and new entrants?
Well, Senator, it's a great question about NextGen. We have about 70% of the technology fielded for NextGen. The challenge that we have now is to integrate those technologies between data communications, the ADS-B surveillance, which we successfully implemented across the entire system in January of 2020, and also the performance-based navigation aspects as well. So what we really need, and where the pandemic set us back a bit, is operationalizing these capabilities and integrating them within our air traffic facilities, because we need to have the controllers and the facility managers actually involved in those implementations by facilities. And because of COVID, we had to get everybody out of the facility who wasn't involved in that daily operation, because it was very, very difficult to socially distance, and we didn't want to expose any more of our employees than necessary to that public health risk. Now that we have various public health measures in place, we are back in the facilities doing more training and then more of this operational implementation. So I expect that the pace is going to pick up considerably here in the coming months. With respect to dynamic airspace management, I know that my Chief Operating Officer has met with you and your staff recently, and I agree with you that this is extremely important to us. We have demands being put on the airspace now with commercial space, drones. We need to make sure traditional civil aviation is protected, and of course military and national security needs are at the core of all that. So we will continue to work through those issues. I know that we had some success here with the most recent exercise, and we'll continue to build on that.
Thank you, and we appreciate all your help along the way and are going to need your continued assistance in that space as the B-21 is hopefully before too long enters that airspace for training purposes, along with all the other air assets that are involved in the large force exercises. So we thank you for your cooperation and hope that you will continue to be able to assist us there. As you know, the FAA issued a notice of policy September 2020 determining that certain UAS may be type certificated as a, quote, special class of aircraft, end quote, and I appreciate your commitment to advancing the integration of UAS into the national airspace system. However, I'm concerned that the agency has since not made more progress toward establishing generally applicable standards for type certification of UAS, which will provide certainty to the industry while maintaining the highest level of safety. So could you talk about whether the FAA remains committed to establishing generally applicable standards for UAS type certification, and what actions has the FAA taken related to establishing generally applicable standards for certification of special classes of UAS since the publication of this notice?
Well, Senator, you raise a very important issue, and we are actively collaborating internally and with the UAS industry on the approval process. As a matter of fact, I've met with several stakeholder groups here over the last couple of months, and we are developing an integrated schedule template that will identify the critical paths, including the environmental elements, which will better inform applicants for certification throughout this process. We'll use a risk-based approach to certificating unmanned aircraft. We think that our existing rules will be able to accommodate any near-term operations, but we're also looking towards the future. I think, as you know, we've got our Mosaic modernization of special airworthiness certificates rulemaking process underway, and that will help us move to the next step of specificity out there for all of our stakeholders, so they know exactly with more granular detail what the requirements are going to be for these systems as they come to market.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Thune. Senator Hickenlooper.
Your testimony and especially the difficult times we have right now with the divisions in the country that I think are causing such disruptions in many ways. The FAA data that we saw demonstrated 5,033 unruly passenger incidents this year. 227 of these resulted in enforcement cases being initiated. In August, you wrote to all U.S. airport officials stating that many of these passengers, many unruly passengers, were interviewed by local police and released without criminal charges of any kind. And you wrote, when this occurs, we miss a key opportunity to hold unruly passengers accountable. Can you describe how clearly incidents are reported by FAA to DOJ and law enforcement? And how could that process maybe be improved to spur more enforcement actions and make people aware that this is a serious issue?
Well, thank you for the question, Senator. And, this has been something that has been, I've been laser focused on for really the entire year this year. Unruly passenger incidents are nothing new, but we have seen a several-fold increase in them. As you know, we have been successful at driving the rates down, but we've still got a ways to go. And it's very much a team effort. And what we're focused on now is closing the seams between how airlines and airports and law enforcement and the federal government handle these issues. And so we've made a good bit of progress, but we've got more to go. And we have referred a number of cases that we give the investigative packages to DOJ. But there are instances where, at some airports, where there will be a federal law enforcement response. This actually happened with one event that was in the news a couple of weeks ago. So I think we're making good progress, but there's certainly more to be done, and it really does require the cooperation of all those private sector stakeholders, including the airports, as well as the various aspects of the federal government, FAA, TSA, and DOJ, and we'll continue to stay focused on that.
Right, absolutely. And there was one where the unruly passenger last week broke a flight attendant's nose, and they had to divert the flight into Denver. Obviously, those issues that are so egregious, there's got to be a better way that, as we do hold that violent passenger accountable, we get it into the media, so that the people hear that this isn't something that's kind of just a passing news item, but they understand that is how serious it is.
Well, Senator, I've been on social media. I've been on news reports. My face is at every airport in the country. I think not something that I wouldn't necessarily want to be remembered for. We're pulling out the stops. We have done memes. We've done everything that we can. I've even been on TMZ, which I never thought I would be, to make sure that the public is aware of the importance of following crew instructions. The crews are there for passenger safety, and this is about a behavior that's not appropriate in an aviation environment, and we need to get it under control.
Absolutely. And I think, obviously, COVID has played a big role in this. I think the fact that it's so hard to find employees and the TSA is still operating with significant less than a full force, so that the waits are very long. I fly out of Denver all the time, but I flew out of Atlanta earlier this week, and it was equally long lines. And I think that's frustrating people. So when they get in the plane, and I realize that you don't control TSA. Let me switch and just quickly, in February, a Boeing 777 made an emergency landing in Denver because the Pratt & Whitney engine had caught fire mid-flight. Debris from the engine scattered across northern metro Denver. The preliminary NTSB report faulted an engine blade for causing the engine fire. In May, FAA required strengthening of blades in order to make sure we prevent this in the future. Do you have an update on the investigation, or what implementation of safety measures are being suggested?
Yes, Senator. We are taking several actions here. We are increasing the inspection frequency of the fan blades. And we've also recently approved a new inspection technology, which is more effective in detecting internal cracks in these titanium blades. So that ultrasonic fan blade inspection process will now be the primary process. It's much more effective. We will still use it in combination with what had been used before, the thermal acoustic imaging, which had been used before. Our chief scientist for propulsion and the U.S. Air Force Research Lab collaborated on this, and so we think that'll be very beneficial. In conjunction with that, we should not have debris falling off of an airplane. That's not acceptable. So we are In our certification, we've actually aligned our engine and airframe certification within the same division to make sure that we're more tightly coordinated, and we are requiring the airplane manufacturers to strengthen the cowling and inlet design, and that work will have to be done before those airplanes can take to the skies again.
Right. Mr. Dickson, you've got one of the toughest jobs in the country right now, and I appreciate you taking some time out to share the facts of these issues and what's being done with all of us. I yield back to the chair.
Thank you. We have Senator Sinema, then Senator Scott, and then Senator Rosen, and I see Senator Peters, so we're all filing in here.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Administrator Dixon, for your testimony today. Today, this committee is examining the implementation of the Aircraft Certification Safety and Accountability Act and the current state of aviation safety. I was proud to support this bipartisan legislation to address significant concerns with our aircraft certification system. Arizonans rely on a safe aviation system for business and leisure travel to bring tourists from all over the world to Arizona, to ship Arizona products to customers, and even to take scenic flights above our stunning landscape. And as the chair of the Aviation Subcommittee, a safe, secure, and healthy aviation system is critical to my work. Over the past years, our subcommittee has held hearings on the tragic Boeing accidents, the state of aviation during the COVID-19 pandemic, and the crucial need to improve our nation's airport infrastructure for the 21st century, while developing bipartisan legislation to continue to improve safety. I appreciate the work the FAA has done to help improve safety, but more needs to be done. And I encourage you to keep working quickly to fully implement the certification statute. Now, Administrator Dixon, as you probably know, general aviation is an important part of Arizona's aviation system. Arizona is home to 4 of the 10 busiest general aviation airports in the country, and thousands of Arizonans participate in general aviation flights. Tragically, on October 1st, there was a mid-air collision between a small airplane and a helicopter near the Chandler Municipal Airport that resulted in 2 fatalities. The NTSB is investigating the collision. As we consider the safety of our entire aviation system, what steps is the FAA taking to continue to improve general aviation safety in Arizona and across the country?
Well, thank you for your question, Senator Sinema. General aviation is absolutely critical. It's we have the largest general aviation segment of any airspace in the world, and several years ago, the FAA had set the goal of reducing the fatal accident rate for GA to less than 1 fatal accident per 100,000 flight hours. And this was actually a goal that was set to be met by 2018. And we were able to surpass that goal. And so in 2019, we re-snapped the line for an additional 10% reduction by 2028. And up to this point, we are exceeding those projections, or to the good. We have done this by partnering with the General Aviation Joint Steering Committee, which is the general aviation counterpart to CAS, the Commercial Aviation Safety Team. The JSC helps us analyze accident trends and undertake appropriate safety interventions when elevated risk is identified. And over the last 8 years, we have actually adopted 47 safety enhancements that are aimed at addressing the root causes of loss of control and engine failure accidents, which are their primary causes. And those have been adopted over the past 3 years. We're also working on enhancements to the airman certification system and working with aviation stakeholder groups to improve testing and training standards as well. And finally, on the subject of mid-air collisions, certainly there are beneficial technologies such as TCAS that can be implemented within GA as well.
Well, thank you, Administrator. In August, the Senate passed the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and our legislation invests $25 billion over 5 years for our nation's aviation system, with $20 billion for airports and $5 billion for improving air traffic control facilities. So this airport funding will modernize runways, aprons, taxiways, and safety areas at every airport in the United States. And the legislation also creates a new airport terminal improvement program for airports to improve their terminal facilities, gates, and intermodal connection facilities. Besides improving the efficiency and passenger experience at our airports, once this bill is passed, it'll also improve safety. Can you describe how the $20 billion for airport improvements will increase airport safety?
Sure. The infrastructure improvements with respect to airports would definitely improve the safety and efficiency of our air transportation system. And, we already estimate a need of in excess of $8 billion in airport projects. And these requested projects exceed existing FAA resources annually. As you know, our AIP budget is normally in the range of about $3.3 billion. So in addition to terminals, we'll be able to do things like runway rehabilitation projects, which, as you know, can cost in the tens of millions of dollars each, and are multi-year projects as well. So that's one specific improvement that we would be looking at with that infrastructure money.
Thank you. Madam Chair, my time's expired. I yield back. Thank you.
Mr. Dixon, how you doing? You've seen all these videos of families being kicked off airplanes because their young children can't keep their mask on for a long time. And I've heard lots of stories of people that have decided just not to fly because they have young children. They know that they're not going to be able to keep their mask on. So can you talk about, why the FAA supports a policy that basically forces these airlines to kick these young families off planes because a young child just can't do it? I don't know if you have young children or grandchildren, but, they're not great at keeping their masks on.
Well, Senator, I can't speak to public health in particular, but obviously we all want to get through the effects of the COVID pandemic, and we certainly support what the public health authorities have put in place in terms of a combination of mitigations. But that's not an FAA requirement. Really, the important thing to me is aviation safety and making sure that passengers on commercial aircraft follow crew members' instructions. And if those requirements are in there, whether they're FAA requirements or not, in this case they're not, we really need to, whatever requirements are in there, whether they're company policies or federal requirements, passengers need to comply with them.
You've seen the reports, first Southwest, and then you hear about the air traffic controllers in Jacksonville, and the latest is all the American airline flights have been canceled. It sure appears it's going to continue to get worse. And then you watch, people that are just completely concerned about this unconstitutional vaccine mandate by the president that's going to impact jobs in this country. And you got the Federal Reserve reports that these vaccine mandates are causing a low labor supply and issues with hiring and retention. So tell me, what do you think is causing these pilot shortages? What's causing these cancellations of all these flights, which are impacting people's jobs all across the country?
Well, Senator, I've spoken with the air carriers and with several of the pilot union leaders, as well as our own leaders within the agency. And at this point in time, I'm not seeing any staffing impact from the vaccine mandate itself. The event that we had a few weeks ago with Southwest down in Florida was due to a combination of factors. The difficulties that we're seeing with some airlines' operations right now, frankly, is, in my estimation, is due more to changes in consumer behavior. All of the algorithms that they use to plan their schedules were disrupted in March of 2020. And leisure demand, I think, as you well know, Florida has been a lot of demand for leisure travel into Florida, and that very close-in demand signal is different from what the airlines had seen before. And so they probably don't have as much buffer in their schedules as they had previously or as they would like. I know that one of the airlines talked about they had a couple thousand flight attendants who were in the process of being recalled from furlough. And so these kinds of things are just taking some time to catch up on the system, and it is creating more operational exposure when there are disruptive events such as convective weather in the system.
So do you think that the vaccine mandate by the president is going to cause any staffing shortages at all, where you think it's going to have any impact on anybody, which is going to impact the safety of travel in the United States?
Senator, my absolute focus, what I can guarantee you, is that we will have a safe aviation system in the U.S. And we are focused on...
Does that mean, excuse me just a second, does that mean you'll have to shut down flights because you won't have enough air traffic controllers? They'll still be safe, but you just won't have the flights.
We have robust contingency plans in place, as we have always, and we have ways that we can make adjustments as we need to. But at this point in time, I'm not seeing any impact on safety, and we will work to make sure that the airspace is open and available for the traveling public.
How many jobs in the aerospace industry or in any agencies you deal with, like air traffic controllers, are going to be lost because of the vaccine mandate? Do you have any idea?
I couldn't speculate.
All right. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over now to Senator Rosen.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Senator Scott. Appreciate that. And thank you, Administrator Dixon, for being here today. I want to talk a little bit about international information sharing and how we use that to enhance pilot training, because I'd like to follow up on an issue I raised 2 years ago when this committee was investigating the problems that led to the 737 MAX 8 accidents. As you may know, in 2017, the Brazilian National Civil Aviation Agency came to the U.S. to test the Boeing 737 MAX 8, and they determined that the changes made to the aircraft from the previous models were substantial enough to warrant request to Boeing for more information about the plane's systems. As a result of this additional information from Boeing, when the Brazilian National Civil Aviation Agency published its updated pilot training requirements, they were able to flag MCAS as one of the changes that the pilots needed to account for when they were flying the MAX 8. When he testified before this committee in October 2019, I asked Boeing's CEO why this information was not flagged for other customers who had the 737 MAX in their fleet for more information sharing, and he didn't respond. And so more information sharing in this case could have been extremely beneficial. So Administrator Dixon, FAA is the global leader in aviation safety, and as such, we have a responsibility to share critical information about aircraft systems with the international community. In the case of Brazil, better communication between national civil aviation agencies, well, it could have saved lives. So I'd like to ask, if FAA were in the exact same position as Brazilian Civil Aviation Agency, as was with MAX 8, what would we have done? Had we received information about a new aircraft so important that it led to significant changes in pilot training requirements? Would we share that with others? Is it policy and practice at FAA to make such information available to the international community?
Well, Senator Rosen, I can say unequivocally yes. And I think that one of the positive aspects of the journey that we have been through over the last couple of years is the collaboration and the work between states of design and aviation authorities is stronger than it ever has been. So we would absolutely share any relevant information that we had regarding pilot training or information that needed to be provided to flight crews with other authorities. And I will emphasize also that the changes that we are putting in place are designed to make sure that no single point of vulnerability or no single individual can lead to a failure of the system. We want to have those additional layers of redundancy put into the process. And what you're pointing out is right on line with what I'm talking about.
And I appreciate that. Have you set up, is there any setup for collaborating and sharing this kind of important information between countries? I mean, I know we would do it, and that's great, but are other countries going to respond the same? Is there a forum for that? And if there isn't, should there be, and how do we make that happen?
Yes, there is a forum. It's called the CMT, the Certification Management Team, and it consists of the 4 countries that are involved that certify transport category aircraft. And that construct has actually been greatly strengthened because of the collaboration that we have executed here over the last couple of years as part of going through this process.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'd like to just quickly ask about FAA's certification workforce. Of course, a 2015 audit found that the FAA at the time lacked comprehensive process for determining aircraft certification service staffing needs, critical for effective ODA oversight and other certification activities. I just kind of like to go quickly to the question. I'd like to build on that discussion. Administrator Dickson, what can you tell us about today's FAA's current certification workforce needs, and how can Congress better work with you to meet those needs? We need to have a robust certification workforce to prevent any injury or loss of life.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we have nearly doubled our number of human factors experts. We will continue to need data scientists, and we'll need to continue to have those engineers in new and emerging technologies and disciplines, software engineers, so the ability to be able to adequately, there's much more of these systems are software driven now, so that is certainly a need that we're currently well resourced for, but we will need to work very closely with the Congress to make sure that we stay ahead of developments as we move forward.
STEM education and training is key. I see my time is up. I believe that, I'm not sure if anyone's there, but I think Senator Peters, you were after me, if I heard that correctly.
Not sure if Senator Peters is available.
Oh, sorry. Oh, Chair Cantwell, I didn't know you were back. Sorry about that.
You're doing a great virtual job of chairing. Thank you so much. If Senator Peters is available, we'd certainly call on him, but maybe he stepped away to go to the last vote. Senator Markey.
Thank you, Madam Chair, very much. First, Madam Chair, I want to recognize the victims of these crashes and their families, including Michael Stumo and Nadia Milleron of Massachusetts, who are here today, and whose daughter, Soumya Stumo, was tragically killed in the Ethiopian 737 MAX crash. These families are here for justice, not just for themselves, but for every other family that was involved, and protections for any other family that ever gets on a plane in our country. And we thank you for being here. We thank you for standing vigil for all of those families. And we are so sorry for your tragic loss. And we're going to work hard to make sure that your message is heard at the FAA and here in Congress. Thank you. After more than 2 years of investigations, it is clear that Boeing abused the authority delegated to it by the FAA to certify its own aircraft. Boeing not only cut countless corners to maximize profit at the expense of safety, it also intentionally misled the FAA in order to avoid more rigorous scrutiny of new technologies installed on the 737 MAX, including the flight control system that caused both tragic nosedives in Indonesia and in Ethiopia. This committee's passage of the Aircraft Safety and Certification Reform Act was a necessary first step towards making sure that this can never happen again. But as today's hearing makes clear, this new law is not fully implemented, and the danger of self-certifying aircraft remains even today, which is unbelievable. It's also clear that Boeing has not truly learned its lesson after giving its former CEO, who oversaw production of the MAX, a $60 million golden parachute. Boeing offered its new CEO a $7 million bonus for rushing the MAX back into service. These decisions do not reveal a company that has learned to prioritize safety and accountability over profit. And that's why I stand with the families of the victims of these crashes who recently sent a letter calling for the FAA to suspend Boeing's delegated authority to certify aircraft until trust is fully restored. And we thank you for your letter. And I know, Madam Chair, you've included it in the record, and I think it's just so important that this become part of our history about
It will be part of the record.
That Congress relies upon. Administrator Dixon, will you suspend Boeing's delegated authority until Congress aircraft certification bill is fully implemented and Boeing has conclusively proven that it has changed its ways?
Senator Markey, thanks for the question. We have reset the relationship with Boeing in no uncertain terms. And we have limited delegation of various items. As I said a moment ago, the airworthiness certificates, we are retaining full control over that. One of the improvements that has been put in place is Boeing's safety management system. That is revealing issues much earlier than they were previously, and we are seeing results, and it is making our oversight more effective and more systematic. We conduct regular performance reviews with them, and we will continue to drive those improvements.
Yeah, I will just say this honestly: limiting delegation is just not enough. We cannot trust Boeing until the systems that enabled and caused these tragedies are fully fixed. And I urge you to take back the FAA's full certification authority. Just take it all back. It should be in your hands, and that's just the bottom line on this, Mr. Administrator. I also want to strongly urge you to finish implementing 2 overdue congressional mandates from the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2018. First, while I'm glad the FAA has finally published its proposed rule to increase the required amount of flight attendant rest hours, you must finalize this proceeding without further delay. And second, the FAA needs to rapidly advance a requirement to install secondary cockpit barriers on new airplanes, which will protect our crews and passengers from anyone who may rush the flight deck. It is simply time to get these essential rules done, Administrator Dixon. Will you complete them in the near future?
We are fully committed to completing them, and I share your frustration, Senator, at how long these processes take.
Have you prioritized those 2 rules?
Yes, we have.
So what is your time frame for finishing those rules?
We are, as you said, we are moving forward with we have the NPRM out on the flight attendant rest period. We are in the process of finalizing the proposal on secondary barriers, and that NPRM should be out in the coming months. It's a good bit more technically complicated, but we want to make sure that we're able to account for as much data as we can on the front end, because it will actually get us to the destination.
Well, do them right, but do them fast. Okay, there's a lot depending upon.
I share your urgency and your emphasis.
And we also have to address aviation cybersecurity. Our airplanes are increasingly computerized, and new software is being rolled out every single day. These technologies offer enormous potential to improve safety and efficiency, but it will only take one hacker to cause a disaster. And that's why I will soon reintroduce my cybersecurity standards for aircraft to improve Resilience Act, or the Cyber Air Act. And this bill will require the disclosure of information relating to cyber attacks on our aviation system, as well as build strong cybersecurity standards directly into our air carrier and aircraft certification processes. Administrator Dixon, do you agree that we need to require enhanced cybersecurity in aviation before tragedy strikes? Yes or no?
Yes, Senator, I do.
Well, I thank you for that, but ultimately I think we're going to need to pass legislation. Have you had a chance to look at my legislation that would mandate this?
I have not seen the specifics, but we currently have protocols in place for avionics, but this is, again, an evolving area. Airplanes are much more software-driven, as you state, these days. And so we need to make sure that the adequate layers of protection are in there.
Right.
So I look forward to working with you on that.
Airplanes today are just flying computers, and they're totally hackable. And to the extent to which this is not a subject that has been addressed properly yet, we're just in a very dangerous period of time. So, again, I urge you to move quickly, and I think as well it should be backed up with legislation that mandates that this occur. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Markey. not aware of other members. I know Senator Peters joined us shortly on video, but I'm not sure if he's returning or anyone else. So while I'll tell members that I'm going to do a second round here, and we'll see if anybody else appears for questions. If not, we will close out the hearing. Administrator, one of the issues that we've heard a lot about in the certification process, and it's come up a couple of times, is the fact that the law requires on the change product rule to change the process, and yet I think you're saying that it's going to take years to do that by rulemaking. And yet we still have a process underway for certifying planes. And so what are you putting in place now to make sure that you have the workforce and the people to review that process while a change product rule is in development? Shouldn't the FAA produce policies to close the loophole in the meantime?
Chair Cantwell, absolutely. And we are working this on two tracks. We have MITRE doing a study for us on the criteria for significant changes for the change product rule to drive those decision criteria. And we have also stood up the International Authorities Working Group. They've already met several times, and they will continue and should provide recommendations to us by next summer on harmonizing the change product rule across all states of design, so it's consistent regardless of where products are being manufactured.
I'm a little more worried about the right now. I mean, this was a pretty big change in the system that allowed technology to outpace our focus on it. And we don't want to see that happen again. So we don't need anything else to happen to know that we need to put something in place, and it was already asked to be put in place so that we would have it today. So this is the issue if you're producing a plane that is a derivative of a product. And this is the challenge that we face. We were very clear in the law. We said every plane has to go through a systems analysis on anything that's different. So
Chair Cantwell, that is actually happening now. So any critical design component requires validation. Anything that touches human factors, and the additional human factors folks that we've got in the agency are laser focused on that issue. We're also involving them throughout the process, not just to design approval, but also for continued operational safety once the airplane is actually out there flying. So that data is actually coming back and informing the certification process where it wasn't to such a degree before.
Well, back to Mr. Wan, because I do, I think he is trying to get the information in his May 13th letter where he basically said that there was not enough information on the 777-9 on their common core system, their communication system. When you look at this quote from the letter, it is, quote, an integrated modular avionics architecture that provides a set of shared computing, networking, input-output resources to support the computing and system interface needs for multiple airplanes. So it sounds very similar to us saying we want to understand what the software does, similar to the MCAS system. And so my question is, here's somebody who is doing what we asked, and just, for the context, there are more than, I think, thousands of SPIA members. See, these are our professional engineers. In the Northwest, there are friends, there are neighbors. These are people that are working and putting their name behind their product. Or let's say they would like to put their name behind their product, but they need this backup of the FAA. And here we have someone on the ground who's saying, yes, I'm going to make sure that we slow down and look at this. But when we look at the fact that the Boeing Oversight Office, the Aviation FAA office overlooking the Boeing manufacturing, has basically been at a static engineering level for decades. How do you expect that we're going to be able to do this oversight and be able to really understand and keep pace with this technology?
Well, Chair Cantwell, it's again, we have increased engineering resources within the BSU, but we're also integrating the Certificate Management Office at Boeing, which oversees the production side of the house, and all the operators that operate Boeing aircraft. We are integrating them so that we can leverage all their expertise in these processes and make sure that the BSU is able to be more effective in its process. In this particular letter, part of what we're dealing with is the issue of what our expectations are for submissions. And that is something that was a very early part of my conversations with Boeing leadership. You've got to give us the full picture. You can't give us a portion of it and then say, well, you'll get everything else next week. So this is just really re-snapping that line to make sure that the applicant that we are overseeing is giving us a complete system picture when they ask for us to move to the next milestone in an approval process.
And to Senator Markey's point, I know that there was an EASA repeal of an ODA authority. At what point would you take that step?
Well, at this point, we are, if we saw that they weren't meeting our expectations on a consistent basis, or if we saw anything in their safety management systems or their data where they weren't making the necessary cultural or transparency improvements, then we would go down that path at some point.
Well, we're going to have our own report and our own reporting of what we've been told by various whistleblowers, but it's clear that the process has changed, that this process of collaboration and solving problems is now changed into well, at least from what we've heard, the FAA not even asking the ODA unit members to produce documentation about testing and information. That literally, they just, does it comply, yes or no? So we have to build this workforce. We have to believe in them. They are our early warning system when something is wrong, and you have to back them up. So again, I'm asking you because I don't see the workforce improvement at the Seattle office that you're describing. I think we're at a total of 52 people, 32 of which are engineers. So I don't think that that's changed much over the years. So how have you, since these accidents, improved the Seattle Oversight Office?
Well, again, I will get you the current numbers, but we have increased our resources, and we are. I know because I've sat down with them personally. Our people feel empowered and backed up as they never have been before, and that's helping them to be more effective. Which I think was part of what you were really focusing on in the legislation, the appointment of the unit member advisors is creating a direct communication path to make sure that there's no interference with that line of communication between
not a direct communication path. That simply makes it sound like it's about communication. It is an authority oversight on whether this is going to move forward or not.
But the awareness in terms of what the issues are and not allowing the employer to interfere with issues that are brought forward directly to the agency, that is going to help us be much more informed and our oversight much more effective.
Well, I look forward to seeing this list of people that you say that you've enhanced the office with. What do you think the skill level is to do certification oversight? What's the skill level and background of the person who heads this up for you at the FAA?
Well, certainly, aeronautical engineers. We need software engineers, and I think that there's a growing need in that area. That was something that that I think with newer platforms, where we're seeing how the systems are interfacing with each other, that it's more and more a part of the architecture of newer model aircraft. And so that's an area that we'll be focused on. Of course, you're always going to have engineers mechanical engineers and others in other aerospace disciplines. But it is transforming to more of a how do all of these automated systems on newer aircraft interface with each other. And I think as we go into the coming years, we'll need to build our workforce on things like artificial intelligence as well.
Well, you and I might agree on that point about software, because I don't think there's enough attention that's been paid to this, either at the skill level of understanding this, particularly from an oversight and certification perspective, but certainly also at the company. And then when it comes to this issue of overload in the cockpit on various alerts and understanding, particularly, look, I think we saw this, I think you saw even in your own private background that you had pilots complain about the automation system and the fact that there was so much happening in these automated systems. So the question is, what do you need to do to make sure that we get this automation right? And I think, to me, there seems to be this task that we also outlined in the bill. You know, when you're now doing an oversight of a new software system that's going to be so critical, I would think the FAA would produce a document that says these are the things that we expect to understand, and that you would get that integrated team that we asked for right now on software, stood up and pounding on the kind of questions that you would want answered from that system. So they're not simply relying on, you know, the information presented. Again, this is a huge transformation that's continuing in aviation, but it's not only in aviation, it's happening in vehicles. This committee is struggling with the same oversight as it relates to unmanned, to cars and other issues. So it's getting your team and getting people to do that oversight now on the technical skill side and getting the right level of workforce. I just don't see that urgency in the FAA's action. So I would ask you to do that and to make that a number one priority as you move forward.
And Chair Cantwell, it is an extremely high priority, and I will get you that additional insight. And that additional
well, it's essential to fulfilling the law. Okay, so I have a larger, broader question, which is just about the process, and this is again a perfect example of it. This 777 issue. So when you're submitting design data to the FAA for a finding of compliance, shouldn't the applicant certify in writing to the FAA that the submitted data complies with all the available and applicable airworthiness standards?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and if the design does not comply with the applicable airworthy standards, the design should be brought into compliance before the FAA certifies the aircraft?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Well, I don't know that that happens. I'm not sure that that's what's happening. And so, again, if we go back down the system, there were a lot of checks on a list of issues, but not on final compliance with that information. I think that's what's missing the system, and I think we're going to continue to look at that. And I would look forward to hearing your thoughts on how we ensure that compliance really does meet that standard. So very much appreciate your answer on that. Thought we had one more question that we wanted to go over. My colleague, there are two issues on the workforce side. Standing up of the Air Grant program. This is very much similar to the Sea Grant program, in getting here on the Hill a professional workforce that is very skilled and knowledgeable in aviation. I'm very proud of my colleagues here today. You can see that many of them have been following this and know specifically, but I think it's easy to say that the oversight of the FAA on this issue needs a more technical staff here on the Hill in addition. And throughout the policymaking realm, I'm very pleased with what the Sea Grant Fellows have been able to achieve, because they brought a lot of scientific knowledge to our understanding as it relates to our NOAA oversight or fisheries oversight. So what is it going to take to get that stood up?
We'll look forward to working with you on it. It is, I think it's a great idea and something that would, I think, improve the collaboration and the communication with the committee and make sure that we're more effective in our implementation. And frankly, lay a solid foundation for the future, as you said.
Yes. Okay. And the same, I think one of my colleagues may have asked about the same ICAO involvement of going to ICAO and making sure that we're setting the same international standards.
Correct. On pilot training, is that?
Yes. Yes. So that we're not going to allow a slippage of the standards set by pilots on an international basis. That we're going to very much understand the manufacturing of planes with integrated software systems, but we're also going to still have a skilled pilot at the helm, 2 pilots who know how to fly the plane if those systems are turned off.
Right, and I think ICAO is important, but we can't rely on ICAO. We've got to help authorities around the world to implement the requirements that we're talking about here, because that's going to really raise the bar in terms of not only pilot training, but also maintenance programs. Anyone operating, in this case, a U.S. product, but any airplane in commercial operation anywhere in the world, we want to work with those authorities. So things like I've talked about before, upset prevention recovery training, flight path management. As we implement those beneficial changes in the United States, we want to work through ICAO to get the standard set, but then we also have to go to the individual aviation authorities to make sure that they're implemented consistently around the world.
We want the United States to be a leader on what is required for both the manufacturers and for the skill set that it takes for flying the planes.
Yes.
And so we want the FAA to set that standard here, and we want you to be a loud advocate for it on an international basis.
Could not agree more.
Thank you. According to my information, the DOT OIG report of February of this year said there's only been 1 engineer added to the Seattle office since the MAX tragedies. So I think there's some resolution here of what's really the fact and information, so I'll look forward to getting that information from you. So, so that we can, I just firmly believe that having the right staffing and having your integrated team set up to advise you right now, not waiting a further moment, and clarifying this change product rule process will be critical. Okay, but very much appreciate Mr. Wan doing his job in standing up. So I think that makes the hearing for us today. The record will remain open until December 1st, 2021. Any senators that would like to submit questions for the record and for the witnesses should do so by November 17th of this year. And we ask responses be returned no later than December 1st. So that concludes our hearing. Again, thank you, Administrator, for being here today.
Thank you, ma'am.
We're adjourned.